Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. 18 minutes after the hour, the Sunrise Show on News Radio 880 KCMX. 50 degrees on its way up to 69 today. Beautiful Father's Day weekend. But I want to welcome onto the program Jonathan Blum. He's the digital skeptic, digitalskeptic.com. But he's put out all kinds of reports. He spends his life poring over details. And I sent him a copy of the Secretary of State for the Oregon's audit just released, and this biennial report and the audit report on counties, Oregon's counties 2016 financial condition review. But before we get to that, Jonathan, thanks so much for being on the program. How are you doing today?
I'm having a great time. We're out here on the East Coast. I'm getting ready to do a whole big news story on how to make $1 million in real estate. I'm doing a big map of where the best places to buy are right now. That's sort of the big project I'm working on now, which is kind of tongue-in-cheek and a lot of fun. So I'm learning a lot about real estate, and it was great that you sent me this report because I got to learn a little more.
Well, exactly right. And we had you on back in May, the best places to build a career and a life, and Benton County, Oregon, stuck out as having the most graduate degrees. That just was 3 times, wasn't it?
Yeah.
3 times the amount of other counties in Oregon. You're on to find out. We had a great time with that. And then you even just posted this graph about coffee in America. Talk about that. This is hysterical, actually.
Oh, yeah. It turns out that guess how many total coffee shops there are in the world?
Oh,
roughly.
I wouldn't even know where to start.
40,000, roughly, right?
Oh,
of those 40,000 globally, how many of them are in North America? It's hilarious. It's hilarious.
Of the 40,000 coffee shops in the world. And
yes,
you've got to figure Starbucks and everything else.
Starbucks, Pete's, Dunkin's, sum them all up. How many?
I would say, America? 30,000 of the 40?
Isn't it amazing, 30,000? So use about 32.
Oh,
so
God.
If you go to India, there's all of 240 in India, and there's 32,000 in North America and Canada. Yeah, it's hilarious.
India
and that's actually going to be a fun map that we're going to map up, and I guess that's going to go up on MSN sometime soon.
Yeah, and I didn't I got to retweet it on our Twitter page, but here's the thing. India doesn't have 1 billion people or something like that?
1.2 billion people and 243 coffee shops. I mean, it's a tea culture, and there's a dramatic cultural shift there, and there's a lot of backstory, but still the numbers are stark. We are a country of coffee junkies.
Well,
I mean,
I guess what you should do to be fair is then go to tea shops around the world, and that would be something else. But anyway, all right. Well, thanks to Howard Schultz and Starbucks, and we've got Dutch Bros out here, which that's a whole other story. The drive-through coffee phenomenon. So, and then, fast forwarding to this, where to buy, this is pretty interesting, the hot spots in the country. And we talked about this death of the rural county. It's very evident in Oregon. The jobs are not being replaced. Values of land, obviously. So you tie that into what you're seeing of hot spots to buy property. What did you find on that?
Well, what was interesting about what you turned me on to was how powerful federal policy can be in rural parts of the country and not just in Oregon. The centralized government plays an enormous role in value of property all across the country. And once you become aware of that, it's a real driver. And so the question I always wanted to ask, or I would like to ask you is, have you ever sort of teamed up in the Northwest with other more land-oriented interests in other parts of the country? Has that coalition ever come together where the farmers, the people who use land in different ways and are very much under the direct management of the federal government, has there ever been sort of a collaboration there or a coalition there?
It's
try to organize things?
Jonathan, I think it would be along the lines of like the farm bureaus and things.
Correct.
I don't think that we really get that. I mean, I know that there's a western region, and we have like western interstate region with the counties at the county level, but that's general county business, not so much landowners or ranching or farming or land-based that and of course, like you said, governmental, because they would feel the thumbprint, the boot print, the thumb pressure of federal, whether it's subsidies, right, for farming or ranching, water rights.
Right. If you make a map, and I started to rough this together, and you can imagine this in your mind, of the parcels of land in the United States that really are affected directly by federal control.
Wow.
And these are essentially not the urban centers where there's enormous local government with funding and power to control their own destinies. You get to a pretty big map. Seriously.
That would be something because there's subsidies, right? I mean, farmers are literally paid not to grow.
As are people who live in floodplains, as are people who have mining rights, as are people who have cattle rights, and each regional part of the country that uses the land in a different way has to develop their own rules on how to cooperate on that land. And when that happens, the feds get involved. And it'd be very interesting to see if there's sort of like a rural coalition. And, as we're in a time when our sort of party boundaries are being redrawn, I'm sort of wondering whether all of you all can sort of get organized. Because at least geographically, and that was certainly what was happening in this report, the pressures that are being felt are very widespread. And at least in geographic terms, almost overwhelming. It's really tiny pockets that are thriving.
Well, yeah, and you can even do a historical study of where it was 100 years ago. Pressure from the federal government wouldn't have been that much, and then as it's increased, and you could probably show with the growth of the federal government and the pressure of the federal government. Oh boy, that would get sticky, huh?
Yeah, well, it's very interesting because what you turned me on to was just how dramatic the change in Oregon was since the 80s when they rejiggered these timber rules. And when these rules change, they change. And so I'm studying up in the Northeast in Maine. And I know this sounds a little tangential, to be kind, but it turns out that the northeastern lobster fishing fleet is actually regulated as an extension of the Farm Bureau. And those fishermen are actually regulated in the same way that the timber industry is, in a screwy kind of way.
Yep.
And it's interesting to see how when those rules change, literally the catch will drop off in 4 months. It's really an instant thing. And it's a very interesting thing to look at geographically. So that's what I've been getting into.
Those are amazing stats, and of course, once again, pushing all that through. Jonathan, we have to get to a break, but let's come right back and talk about this Oregon auditor report came out of the Secretary of State, and what they're doing is looking at the counties, the four, I don't even want to call them bottom feeders, but the counties that are they're marked under distress anyway. Pardon my pun on the other thing, but we've got Jonathan Blum with us. He's Jonathan Bloom, and he's the digital skeptic, thedigitalskeptic.com, and he does some incredible work, and we can't wait to get back on. So let's get to a break and come right back. More on the Sunrise Show after this. Morning, everyone. 35 minutes after the hour, we're continuing with Jonathan Bloom. He's the digital skeptic out of New York, and he's been featured on ABC News, CNBC, and Fortune Small Business and Entrepreneur Magazine. He's got a book coming out at the end of the year. He hasn't got it quite worked out yet, but we'll talk to him more as that goes. And he put out a report, The Best Places to Build a Career and Life. And actually, Benton County, Oregon came out. And then we just talked this last segment about coffee shops in America, or around the world, actually. 40,000 coffee shops around the world. America has 32,000 of them. And what was it, Jonathan? How many coffee shops in India? 201?
243 in all of India. Now, obviously, India is a tea culture, and there's a whole cultural backstory there, so there's a lot of reasons for it. But still, it's a very striking story as to what a nation of, caffeine addicts we've become.
Well, yeah, and here's the next thing. Isn't coffee the number 3 commodity in the world?
The coffee economy not only creates a level of wealth, it is a trade and logistics not nightmare, but sort of a miracle. I
Yeah.
mean, the amount of sheer bulk material that moves essentially from the southern hemisphere north, it's really fascinating to watch. But it is, it's right up there with the oil industry.
Amazing.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, I sent to you this Secretary of State audit report from the state of Oregon that came out, and it's called the Oregon County's 2016 Financial Condition Review. And Jonathan, talk to our listeners about what you found in that.
Well, what's interesting about a report like this, and I'm going to have to bring out my data journalist soapbox here, is our government does a really crummy job of putting information out in a way where the public can actually analyze it fairly. And so what they tend to do is they release these things in the so-called PDF format. That's Adobe's portable document format.
Right.
And you'll see it, it's the little red square. It's not the little W, which is a Word file. And what happens in PDF formats are there's enormous limitations as to what you can do with the data in those documents. And for example, in this, there's really very good information here on per capita income and debt levels and tax rates, all the stuff you really want to see by county. They're in really nice graphics. The problem is they're presented in this PDF format as still locked photos. So a journalist like me can't get a hold of it quickly, put it up on a map, and start analyzing why things are happening. We're really forced to wrestle with these documents and guess. And that is just an endless source of frustration in trying to really analyze these documents. And I think it's really, and a lot of my colleagues agree, it really isn't what our tax dollars should be going towards, is to putting out public information in a way where the public can't easily digest it.
Right, so it's a disservice, and if you want to put it on a, geographically, that way you would see, it would overlay over the top of geographic, demographic areas, interstates, waterways, mountain ranges, right?
All of these questions, and here, let's just go right to the first chart. This is the one that jumps out at you. Local revenue per capita, which is really money, right? It's money, people, and jobs. That's really what the story of geography is always about.
Right.
Money, people, and jobs. Okay, so what's the money here? Local revenue per capita, Josephine County, $181 per person over the 5-year average. You go down to the bottom in Sherman, which is up in the northwest, and it's $8,454 per person. Now, obviously, there's a backstory there.
There's
probably have a wealthy community. It's relatively unpopulated. There has to be a story for that, right? The problem is that you can't get into that information quickly to analyze why those things are happening, and you just have to kind of accept the government's take on why that story is what it is. You can't study it easily, and that's the problem there.
Yeah, exactly. And then this next chart with property tax rates, it's interesting that the state, they do identify, because Josephine County has the lowest at 59 cents per thousand, and then once again, Sherman, who we just showed at $8,000, $8,400 per capita per person, is now $8.71 per thousand, which is, we can't even imagine the type of tax rate. But here's the crazy part. The state illustrated, they sidelined it, says Josephine County lowest permanent tax rate, 62% of its area in non-taxable federal lands generated the least amount of local revenues. So they're acknowledging that the federal issue is huge.
Correct. And I would argue, I would imagine that what's going on in Wheeler and Sherman is so much of the land is off limits to development. There's probably a very affluent community there that are very small. You probably have very few individuals. Each one of them has to shoulder an enormous part of the tax burden in order to keep the government functioning, and that's why those counties are taxed at such a higher rate. But again, you can't explore that because you can't put the information up quickly and compare them to a Yamhill or a Washington or a Benton, where you guys are, where probably the median price values are a lot closer to the real story in Oregon. And that's the problem with these reports.
And then they have the guts to go into the timber revenue dependence.
Shout, shout, I'm talking to you, so come on. Shout.
Good morning, everyone. 17 minutes after the hour. Welcome back to the Sunrise Show. Craig Fronikin is your host, and we've got Dr. Mark Christian with the Global Faith Institute on the phone this morning. It's always a fascinating discussion. Dr. Mark Christian, of course, born-again Christian, but was born and raised in Egypt to study, and was studied to be an imam. And with his family in the Muslim Brotherhood, he had fast track and then realized it wasn't for him, and he got out of there and came to America with his family. And like I said, born-again Christian. And for Muslim families, that's a death wish. And so, Mark, thank you for being with us and your extreme courage in leading your family to safety and then taking on this death threat from the Muslim community. Anyway, good morning, sir. Welcome.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the great, introduction. And good morning to you and all your listeners, and happy Father's Day.
Thank you so much. And you've come to America, and you've started the Global Faith Institute. This is amazing, especially with you as a medical practitioner, both an OBGYN and MD. And the globalfaithinstitute.org is a wealth of knowledge. And since that time, you've penned a series of 8 booklets. And the book I've got in front of me, Women and Islam, book number 7. And I love how you've done this because you really, quite frankly, start with a table of contents, and you start right away with questions. And the number one question: what does the Quran say about women? This just cuts right to the quick. This tells Americans where the Quran is and its stand and rights for women. And this is, I don't know why this isn't discussed more, quite frankly.
Because, the topic of Islam is kind of very confusing to people because, many Americans want to judge Islam the same way they judge their own faith and their adherence and their loyalty to their own religion. And this is kind of completely wrong and false within Islamic teaching. You are not going to find lots of pastors or priests or religious leaders in any Judeo-Christian kind of background church or a synagogue talking in details about what happened and what took place in ancient history about, what women and the evolution of women. Most of the messages is, kind of compatible with the time that we live in. And this is not the case with Islam. When we talk about Islam, Muslims are obligated to live with the 7th century kind of ideology and religion and teachings. And any imam which is imam actually, for the people who doesn't know what imam is the religious leader in Islam, is equal to pastor or a priest in Christianity. He is the religious leader in Islam. For an imam to say anything that is different from how Muhammad taught things, he is disqualifying himself immediately from leadership of the mosque, and the Muslims in that mosque will immediately kind of fire him or kick him out or so forth. It is the people who keep the imam kind of on track and not the opposite, because the imam or the religious leader has to follow the teachings of Islam exactly. And this is why when we have to dig into Islamic teachings, we have to go and to look in the text and what the text exactly says, and not what any imam in America, or have this understanding that any imam in America or anywhere else will have a different views about how Islam, supposed to treat women and so forth.
It's interesting, Mark. I wonder if imams in this country that are at a mosque, that they come here, do they take directives from groups such as Muslim Brotherhood or from the Middle East? Only.
That's a very good question, Greg. That's another topic. Number one, the narrative that Islam in America is any different from Islam in Saudi Arabia or Iran or Egypt is a very false narrative. For any imam to be legalized and get the leadership of a mosque in America, they have to get the license from one of those three countries, Egypt or Iran or Saudi Arabia. Even here in America, for anyone want to teach, they have to get the license from abroad. The other thing is, which is a very good statistics that I would love people to know today, is we have more than 3,500 mosques in America at this point in time. Most of them has been built after 9/11, and I'm talking about about 80% of those mosques has been built since 9/11. So they are recent mosques have been built in the United States. And here is the statistic that I need people to know very well. Most of those mosques, and I'm talking about 80% of the mosques in America, is owned and controlled and staffed by Muslim Brotherhood Fund Group. It's called NAIT, N-A-I-T, North American Islamic Trust. And people need to know that the alliance of that organization with the Muslim Brotherhood is very well documented, and also the alliance of the Muslim Brotherhood with terrorism is very well documented. So people need to understand very well that 80% of the mosques in America is very well controlled by an ideology that is completely foreign and imported either from Saudi Arabia or from Egypt to the United States on a regular basis, on a daily basis.
Gosh, that's just amazing. I didn't want to get away from your book number 7, Women and Islam, but the Quran, it says about women. This is amazing. And of course, you've been up close and personal because you're an OBGYN doctor, but with women, there's got to be, I mean, I know that they're brainwashed, so they're not suffering unless their education, or they start realizing that they are equal. And yet they're not treated equal, correct?
You know, yes. Well, the woman in Islam is really a second category citizen, and the idea that women feel that they are being honored by Islam, because many Muslim women, or actually all Muslim women, and I would say all, even though this is against scientific terms when you say all, but the reality is, yes, all of what Muslim women think that they are being honored by Islam because they don't know any different. They don't see any different. And they see that if you are not under this kind of strict regime of Islam, then you are not respected. And they look at women in, Hollywood movies and stuff like that as an example of how women is treated as not with so much respect. The women in Islam is a second category citizen. They are not respected whatsoever, and they don't know any different. This is the way they think things are supposed to go. And when women cover themselves and with hijab and other things, they think, many of them actually are very oppressed by doing so. But, if you look at it, this is not a protection, but mostly telling women from a very young age, at age of 7 and 8, that they're sex objects and they need to cover themselves so men would not lust after them and God will punish them for doing so. I was just reading this morning an article that was put together in one of the newspapers in Egypt. We are going through the month of Ramadan. The month of Ramadan is a month where Muslims are supposed to fast from the sunrise to sunset and so forth. And they have a discussion in the major newspaper. Should women wear pants or not? And how is that going to be perceived by God? We are living in 2016, and this is the main article in the front page of a main newspaper in Cairo, Egypt.
Whether
and he's talking about women wearing pants or not is supposed to be okay or not with Allah, with God of Islam.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think that, like you said in the very beginning, they are Islam in the 7th century, and this is still continuing because Muhammad, and it came in the 7th century, and there it is. This is an amazing, Mark. When we come back from the break, I want to talk about this because you mentioned in your book, Women and Islam, it's book number 7 in your 8 booklet series. You can find it on his website, globalfaithinstitute.org. But you say that Christian women in the United States are the #1 converts to Islam. let's talk about that when we come back. This is even more scary than everything else, because you're, once again, whether you call it brainwashing or you call it whatever or you call it honoring, it truly isn't. We've got Dr. Mark Christian with the Global Faith Institute on the phone with us this morning. We're discussing his 7th book in an 8-book series, and what does the Quran say about women? And we'll discuss this Christian women in the United States converting. I'm just shocked. We'll be right back. News Radio 880 KCMX, Sunrise with Craig. Will return after this. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. 35 minutes after the hour, continuing with Dr. Mark Christian from the Global Faith Institute. We host him on Monday mornings from time to time, and you can get to his website, globalfaithinstitute.org. It's a wealth of information, and on there you can find out more about his books. He's got a 8-booklet series, and we're discussing right now his 7th book, Women and Islam. And I love how you set this up. You basically just set up a selection of questions. In this particular book, there's 25 questions that are most common and what we can do about it, and very easy read. But quite frankly, right out of the introduction, you mentioned that Christian women in the United States are the #1 converts to Islam. Explain that, please.
I wish I can explain it. I just that's a very weird thing, actually. Statistics that I came across a while ago, and it was intriguing to the limit that I needed to check out what's going on with it. Is it that true or not? Because the census in America, the #1 converts to Islam are black men in jail and so forth in Nation of Islam, but that statistic changed dramatically in the last few years. And it takes only the person to go onto YouTube right now and to type in converts to Islam, and you will see the enormous amount of women who are converting to Islam from Judeo-Christian kind of background, either Jews or Christians, Catholics, and others. And it is not only that. There is a very well-documented statistics about the number of women who are converting to Islam, and you see that there is lots of them converting at college age and other places and so forth. The reasoning for this, in my opinion, and I've been doing some good study about that to see what's going on exactly, and I see that the problem is not only that there is a false narrative and lies coming out from Islamic institutions. There is also a fault in our side as Christians and churches and Judeo-Christian kind of background, because, we are not able to kind of send the good message about our faith in a proper way. Communicating the message, especially with the younger generation, is not going out very well. And we are creating a vacuum within our own, and a vacuum is always filled by, something, and the something is the lies of Islam and the Islamic institution and Islamic organizations in America. So, there is a problem within, and there is also a bunch of lies and also a bunch of deception going on.
The next thing, of course, is how women, we're talking about how women are treated and the discussion in the Quran, and these questions are fascinating from the standpoint of why, when you talk about equal rights amongst all and fair, rights and, unalienable rights, both for men and women, and then here you have this, quite frankly, barbaric, as far as I'm concerned, it's barbaric, the fact that women are not treated equally, and yet they're brainwashed. And, you could very quickly and easily, especially with your experience as an OBGYN doctor, go into this barbaric claim of sexual mutilation, and it's just crazy for that women are faced with this.
It takes me an hour and a half minimum to explain how women is treated in Islam, and you are talking about physical genital mutilation, which is actually named as female circumcision in Muslim countries. And yes, there is a discussion whether this is an Islamic practice or not. It happens to be encouraged by the Prophet of Islam, but never been condemned. So this is why Muslim women and Muslim parents and families are doing it on a regular basis. Just in a couple of weeks ago, there is a woman who took both of her daughters, twin, in their in the late teen years, and she, asked the doctor to perform female circumcision on her, which is female genital mutilation, basically. And one of them died on the table while they are doing this because there was not enough anesthesia and there was lots of bleeding and so forth. So there is victims on a regular basis, on a daily basis, that women lose their life physically. The other thing is the manipulation in women's life and women's mindset within Islam is even far more damaging. Women in Islam understand and believe that their status as a second category citizen is good. Women think is that being beaten by their husband is an okay thing. And they look at Muhammad, the founder of Islam, as a very good and nice man because he said never break a bone or hit the face. So you are talking about people who accepted their status as second category citizens. They accepted the status as a sex object. They accepted the status to be manipulated and they kind of brainwashed and looked at, in this kind of a very derogatory status, and they think this is okay. This is the problem that you are dealing with in Islam. And then when Islam is preached in America, there is a whole bunch of lies and deception, and it takes me hours to explain exactly what they do. Because the Islamist organization in America, they use lots of literature has been produced by, critiques of Christianity and critiques of Judaism to further their own goal. And then they use some kind of twisted facts about Islam to lure Christian women and Jewish women into Islam. So this is a very well, organized effort, very well funded, and you can look at, again, go to the YouTube videos right now and see how much well-produced those videos are because, there is lots of money, lots of efforts into this to change, the women in America and so forth.
It's interesting, Mark. And you recently you just published an article. It was published in the Washington Times talking about the shooting down in Orlando, but also too you were just featured on the Laura Ingraham show. What did since we're talking about women in Islam? Did Laura Ingraham? What kind of questions did she have for you related to women in Islam? Were there any, or was it something else topic?
When we were talking about the treatment of homosexuals, and here is the thing that I would love people to know. In the Laura Ingraham show and other shows, we're talking about homosexuality and how it has been looked at from Islam and from Judeo-Christian values. And here is a bottom line. In Judeo-Christian values, in the Bible, Old and New Testament, homosexuality is considered a sin. There's no doubt about that.
Right.
And in Islam as well, it is considered a sin, a very big sin. The difference between Judeo-Christian Bible and the Quran, as in Islam, huge big difference between the two. How you are supposed to treat the sin, and specifically the sin of homosexuality. In Judeo-Christian values, we have forgiveness, and we have in Judaism there is lots of reformation and progressive ideas that they are not killing the homosexuals anymore. In Christianity, we have Jesus who died on the cross for the sin for every person. And he is asking us and teaching us as Christians that we are supposed to love and serve the sinners. It is a sin, but we are supposed to love and serve the sinners. And in Judaism, there is progressiveness that they never call right now ever, and you are not going to find in any Judaism or any Jewish synagogue or any kind of rabbi that is going to call for the death of any human being whatsoever, even though that was part of the teachings of Judaism back in the day. But
Right.
you are not going to find anybody saying that in the current time. And we have that pastor in America that did that, and he has been criticized and actually about to be arrested because he called for the death of homosexuals, okay? Because this is not a teaching of Judeo-Christians. In Islam, no imam has the ability or even the freedom to say anything different from what Muhammad said. And Muhammad said, if there is a homosexual, even in a rape situation, the homosexual is supposed to be killed. The one who did the act and the one who the act has been done to him. Even if the act has been done to him is being raped, he has to be killed as well. This is the teachings of Islam according to homosexuality. So looking at the difference between Islam and Judeo-Christian values is very, very important to see how Muslims look at things and how Judeo-Christians look at things and the reformation and the movement. And unfortunately, there is no progressive movements in Islam whatsoever, and there is no kind of any new message within Islam as well. And that takes us to another point that I wanted to highlight today, if you don't mind. I put together, a petition, and it has been signed by over 1,000 people so far just this weekend. And that petition is, we hear a lot of religious organization, Muslim religious organization in America about, we condemn this act, we condemn that act, but they never really take responsibility whatsoever. And they should. And the petition is calling on the Islamic institution in America to take responsibility of the violent act that is taking place. And we are asking them specifically to acknowledge that there is a problem within the Islamic, teachings. And we are asking them specifically to take an active steps toward changing that message. I think it's about time to call spade to spade and to be honest and to be upfront. Enough of going into circles and so forth. And there is lots of people. I would love people to go to our website and read the petition in its entirety, and if they feel compelled by the message, I would love them to sign and to include themselves into this movement.
Mark, we posted that link on our Facebook page last week, and we'll grab it again and post it up there again, because that's exactly right. And here's what's going on. Islam, and now that the LGBT community has been firmly, completely targeted from Orlando last week, and you have the issue between the violence and the hatred toward the LGBT community from Islam, and also you have the lack of rights or looking down at women as a second-class citizen within the Islam, community, and you're thinking, wait a minute, that would expose Islam and imams for saying, hey, if you're going to allow women being treated as a second-class citizen, if you're going to allow men and women in the LGBT community to be targeted and hated and scorned and killed, then all of a sudden we got a major problem. And it's kind of like, pick up your stuff, and Muslims, Islam, there's the door. Was that too harsh, Mark?
It's not. I think honesty is crucial, and it is very important to be very, very upfront in this time that we live in. And unfortunately, there is lots of people in the homosexual community right now that, trying to blame Christianity for what took place, even though the guy was a Muslim and he's calling, his actions refer to Islam and so forth. The reality is, it is time for, America to stand together against the evil, Muslims and everybody else. And if they really, really want to be assimilated and part of America, everybody is supposed to be, because there is only one America and there is supposed to be one flag and one American people. We're not supposed to be different kinds of backgrounds and so forth. So it is time for the Muslim community to take responsibility instead of judging and trying to send a message that, they condemn what took place, but they never take any step whatsoever in any kind of positive direction except lying and deceiving and running away from the problem and so forth, because it's not going to work anymore. Things are going to get worse if you continue doing that.
Exactly right. Exactly. Boy, this is fascinating. Mark, thank you so much for your time. We're out of it, unfortunately. It's fascinating. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Mark Christian, the executive director and founder of the Global Faith Institute. I would encourage you to go to globalfaithinstitute.org, and the petition will be there, and we'll put this petition up on our Facebook page, Sunrise on KCMX. And Mark, thanks so much for your time this morning. It's fascinating. We just finished discussing his 7th book in an 8-book series called Women and Islam, and we barely scratched the surface, and we'll have to continue on book 7 when we come back maybe next week. Mark, thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
All right. Oh, fascinating. This is incredible stuff. If you're talking about saving our country and standing up for our country, remembering the legacy of the men and women who fought and died for this country, then this conversation we just had is a very serious and real conversation. We'll be right back. We've got more to go. Sunrise with Craig on News Radio 880 KCMX. Stay tuned. More is coming, and we'll take your calls as well. The phone number here, 541-772-8255. Back after this quick break on News Radio 880 KCMX.